So, thank you everybody for joining today's episode of Your Double podcast. I'm here with Jae Sung, who is a father of Bryan, who was abducted from the US to South Korea in 2019 in a case of parental abduction. And he's here to share his story with everybody today, talk a bit about the challenges he's faced. Sadly, his son is still in Korea and they have not been reunited. So thank you for taking the time today, Jay, and telling us a bit about your story. I know how painful it can be.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a very heartbreaking situation. I'm sure all the other left behind parents will probably have the same kind of um, heart-wrenching experience. It's even hard to describe, but I'm really glad to be here to share my story, raise awareness, and ultimately bring some positive movements in the society.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jay, can you just tell us a bit about how your case started? I understand that, you and your wife were living at the time in the US, and that's where the marriage broke down. And you did, both of you, and the court system, it seemed, your due diligence to create an environment and a system, we could say, where co-parenting would be the norm. And then, your son was abducted to South Korea, and that's now 6 years ago and hasn't been returned. So I'm wondering, any viewers that are watching that potentially in international marriages may be really interested in hearing how how Bryan was actually abducted. What happened at the beginning when divorce proceedings started?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a long story, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible. The divorce started back in 2018. It's almost 7 years ago now. It's all started when Brian's mother, my ex-wife, was arrested for some domestic violence case. There's a lot to talk about that particular case too, but just for the purpose of making the story easier to digest, that's how it started. And the reason why that is important is because I was left with Brian alone, and I was the sole custodian for an extended period of time. And the mother had some visitations, some supervised visitations. And the divorce process went on for about a year. And during that process, we had the parenting evaluator involved, also known as guardian ad litem. So there was some, custody investigation. There were some temporary orders that said Brian belongs to the U.S. And nobody can take him out of the country or Washington State, actually. And also stating that both parents will have to submit his two passports to the attorneys so that there will be no danger of child abduction to another country. The interesting that's something that is really unique about my case because a lot of parental abductions to other countries, they happen usually at the beginning stage of the family structure breaking down, usually even before the divorce process starts. For example, if a couple has some, you know, troubles in their household, the mother or the father will decide, okay, I'm going to go back to my home country, but I'm going to take my child with me. And then once they take the child, there's a whole lot of discussions about where does the child originally belong? Does the child was this truly an unlawful or wrongful removal of the child? Was it a true abduction? So that kind of disputes and discussions will come after the abduction. In my case, the mother, the abductor, the mother in this case, filed the divorce stating that Washington State is the child's jurisdiction. And we did get some temporary uh, custody orders It did state that Bryan should not be taken out of the country. And most importantly, after a whole year process, we landed an agreement. And this agreement stated very clearly what are the conditions that Bryan can go to Korea, and um, and it also strictly prohibited the wrongful retention or failure to return Bryan. So if I like to directly quote what it said, failure to return Bryan according to the planned trip, according to the planned trip, is a major violation of this agreement, and it will give rise to civil contempt and criminal action. She signed the paper. I signed the paper. The attorneys on both sides signed the paper, and the mediator also signed the entire paper, certifying that it was supervised by the mediator, the certified official mediator that is recognized by the court. So it cannot be any clearer than that nobody can hold Bryan without anybody's consent in another country like Korea. But this abduction happened in 2019 when the mother took Bryan for what was supposed to be a 3 week trip based on the agreement that we signed, and then started arguing I cannot return because there was a Korean passport that was invalidated that she kept with her secretly. And she said, because this passport is invalidated, I cannot leave the country because when she entered the country, she used this invalidated passport. And that's another really interesting thing about my case. It has so many layers where the Korean government failed. They they did things that are not supposed to happen. And one of those things is letting her come in with an invalidated passport. Because if they said, we can't let you in with this invalidated passport, how did you even leave America? Then she would have submitted the US passport and it would have caused no problem. But she said, well, this is the only passport I have, but my child is so young. Can you please let me in? And he let her in. And because she was let in with this invalidated passport, she could use that as an excuse that she doesn't have the same passport to leave the country because the way that Korean exit control works is you have to use the same passport that you use to enter the country.
But
And then she,
there are
sorry.
people, there are people I'm sure that change their passports, right? Like, let's say I'm a Korean citizen, I'm in Korea, I entered from vacation, and then my passport expires, or I lost my passport. I mean, I'm gonna change my passport. There must be some type of mechanism that exists that would say you can, leave later on a different passport. That if the Korean authorities really wanted to um, fix the abduction case and get it right, they could have, right?
Yeah, so I think there are two components here. Can you leave the country with a new passport? So just to go a little bit deeper into this part of the story, when I invalidated the passport, I was looking for this passport because she kept it hidden somewhere
Mm.
and didn't tell me where it was. Didn't tell me the fact that she kept it somewhere. So
Mhm.
I kept asking, "Where's this Korean passport? Have you seen it? Have you seen it?" And then because eventually her family member, her brother, told me that they don't have the passport, I reported this to the Korean consulate in the U.S. and also filed what is known to be passport reissuance objection document. So what that means is without my written consent, the other parent cannot make the passport herself. So I basically blocked her from making a new passport because we had the US passport, and that was the passport we were going to have in control because we didn't know where the Korean passport was. Um, so when she was trying to leave the country, she argued that she has to have a new Korean passport. And then these days, she uses that as an excuse. And she takes it to the, it, it's kind of unbelievable, but she takes it to an extent that she even argues that I somehow tricked her to go to Korea and then blocked her from making the passport so that I can win the custody battle in the US. I don't know what to say. I don't even know if anybody will believe that, but the way that she frames it just kind of blows my mind. Like, what kind of is that even? I don't know what to say.
Pretty crazy. Look,
Yeah,
I want to talk about the US government and put a bit of heat on them. And we're both American citizens. Bryan, I assume, was born in the US and lived in the US until he was abducted, correct?
correct. Yeah.
And even if he didn't, it doesn't matter. He's a US citizen. So what's really shocking to me is you have an agreement that is signed under US jurisdiction that clearly states she can go for 3 weeks to Korea with Bryan, and then she has to return. She doesn't return, then she is breaking that agreement, and there will be consequences for that agreement. And by the way, this is not the first time I've heard of this. I've heard many cases similar to this where the parent, the US citizen, I'm talking about US case, and has begged the judge, do not allow the child to go to vacation to countries like Japan, which is notorious for being the black hole of parental abduction, because my children will not come back. The judge did not listen. The children went, they were abducted, and the mother went through major financial difficulties even after the children returned. And it was because of the US government. It was not actually the Japanese government's fault in that case, it was the US government. In fact, when her children came back, she was homeless for some time because of the amount of money she had to pay in US courts, and the judge didn't even listen to her. So this is really shocking to me. I would think that it's very clear to a US court that what she did is parental abduction. Like you said, it could not be clear. There's no gray. It's black and white. She signed agreement saying she will go 3 weeks and she will come back. And she didn't. So, and now it's been 6 years and Bryan's not back, which tells me the US government is failing Bryan and failing you. They're failing American citizens. Why? Like what is the government even doing to help if everything seems so clear? What is the US government's role, whether that be local, state, federal level?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Um, I do have a lot of areas that I do criticize our own government. There are areas that definitely need improvement. That is not to say US government has not tried. And I still believe in our system because without that belief, we have to throw away everything. Um, any structure that we built so far, it was for nothing. So I truly believe that eventually we'll get this right. But it seems like it's taking way too long, especially when you consider how fast children grow and how short our lives are. One generation passes by really quickly, and that generation is a lost generation just because we didn't get the system right. We didn't make the society or the legal system function the way it should. We lost a whole generation. 10 years, kids grow up and they will have no memories of childhood with their other parent. So definitely US government is failing in certain areas. The main difficulty, in my opinion, is the fact that there is a blatant disrespect from the foreign government officials on many levels, from the very low field officer level, that either, if it's a judge making judgments, or if it's the legal representative doing their job within the boundary of law and ethical conduct. Um, and then the enforcement officers, any government workers that are involved, they all share some responsibility, but it all goes all the way up to maybe the presidential level
Mm.
or the entire Korean government, involving Supreme Court, the lawmakers, the leader of the government, who is in cases of Korea, it would be the president. And this is not to make it a political issue in any way, because I'm not affiliated to any political party in Korea. I'm not in favor of any party. I don't dislike any party. I'm just um, stating the fact that Korea as a country is its failing to fulfill their obligation under international treaty, and the society is just not functioning well to make things right. Because if there is any part of the law that was written incorrectly, they need to make amendments. If there is any special interpretation of law that is needed, they have to do it. If there are some vague areas where discussion needs to happen and some human decision needs to be involved so that they can instruct the people who are in charge, they have to do that. But they don't do it. And why are they not doing it? It's because there are so many ways for them to say, well, because of this reason, structurally, we can't do anything. And the area that US government has been failing is not having a good goal, having a clear purpose. It's more about failing to say no when it is time to say this is this is not how it's supposed to be. You have to call the other countries out.
So it seems
But
that the US government is not willing to step in and voice their concerns when things in Korea regarding this parental abduction case, or maybe others as well, are not following the process that they should be. And the US government is staying silent on that, not speaking up loud enough.
I think you're correct when you said it's not loud enough, because I'm sure they are doing
Yeah.
something. But the bottom line is it hasn't been successful enough. And when the outcome is not what you are willing to accept, it needs to be reviewed, and the right question has to be asked. Is our strategy working, or is there any change that we need to make? And I know for a fact that the US government, at a certain level, they are putting pressure on Korea to do their job, to follow what they made a promise about, to keep their promise, honor their international treaty that they signed, and do the right thing from the humanitarian standpoint. So there are some discussions going on, but there are a lot of diplomatic, from a diplomatic standpoint, there are some sensitivity to the matter, I would say. And
So your case has spanned at least two administration, Biden and Trump, right? Have you noticed any differences in approaches or willingness to speak up louder based on the administration, or is it kind of the same BS, for lack of a better word, every day? The same kind of approach. Doesn't matter who's leading the country.
so, to be completely honest, I don't get to see the entirety of the situation. I don't really know internally what kind of discussions are going on. I only get to see it from a superficial level. And the reason why it's hard to compare directly this administration versus that administration is because um, my case is changing in real time. So, of course, there's going to be escalation. So, there are some positive moves. I don't know. I do believe that certain change of administration led to a slightly different approach, different type of motivation factor that was given to Korea. So there are some positive changes. And one good example would be the fact that FBI finally started moving. So they are seriously considering the extradition process. And I know the process has already got initiated. So there are certain things that are in the works. And I'm pretty sure the abductor, the mother of the child, is also aware of this. And I know there are some movements going on. It's just going back to what we were saying earlier. Time is a sensitive factor here, and no matter what we do, it's not going to be fast enough to, bring Bryan back in a very timely manner.
Yeah.
And not to mention that it will never bring back the lost time, the past 6 years that I didn't get to spend with him.
This is a
So,
very valid point, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand it or analyze it enough. I have met with plenty of parents who have their children abducted and been reunited. When time goes on, if the parent and the child, if there's an international marriage and there are two languages spoken at home, and the child is quite young, maybe under 5 years old, and they're moved back to one parent's country, there is often loss of language. And so if the second parent doesn't speak that language, you're lucky that you do. I have seen parents go, I was reunited with my daughter. I don't speak a word that she speaks. Like, can you imagine not being able to interact, to verbally interact with your child, and you're having to teach your child a language? And so this is an important point why time is of the essence, so that that at least linguistic connection remains. Then a whole nother aspect is alienation, right? Parents that are abducting their children, I don't think they're sitting and saying great things about the other parent. They're making excuses, painting a bad picture of that parent to justify the abduction. And children, they listen, they listen, they're easily manipulated in a way, brainwashed, they're sponges. They hear what mom or dad says and they believe it. And so I've seen plenty of cases where it was a very clear abduction case. It went through The Hague. It was also very black and white. The children needed to be back in the country that, they had lived in. They're now 18, 19, 20, and they want nothing to do with the left behind parent. So that parent's dream of like, okay, I'll just kind of push through until my kids get to turned 18 and they have some ability to make decisions on their own. That sometimes it just doesn't happen because that child has been brainwashed their entire life to think that parent didn't want them, that parent was terrible, maybe they were abusive, whatever, you name it. And so that means that parent has most likely lost their child forever. The grandparent, the cousins, the aunts, uncles in the US, you name it, same thing. I've heard cases of, grandma going and trying to meet with the children who were of age, who were adults at college, trying to say, we love you, we miss you, and the child completely blocking it. So I think government officials, they really need to understand that. And that's what I keep hearing is a big failure of The Hague is that it's dragged on way too long. And then it's to a point that even when reunification happens, it's not the beautiful scene that we imagine in, movies where the child runs to the parent, they hug, and everything's just beautiful and amazing again. No, there are real challenges after the reunification to rebuild relationships, language abilities, and sometimes those are never rebuilt, to be frank.
you have a very good point because when abductions happen, I'm sure a lot of left behind parents will have the same experience, but a lot of people around you will say, oh, yeah, well, once they turn 18, don't they have their own choice? Maybe you can start talking to him then. Just patiently wait until that day comes. But in reality, you're right. Uh, it's not just that some cases they don't get to reunite. From what I've seen, most cases the child would not even care about that other left behind parent because to them it's a stranger. And like you said, a lot of times they would have been told that this other parent is a very evil person. They would be indoctrinated with some negative um, images and ideas about the other parent. And having some other adult wanting to see you when you have no memories of them, it's weird. If you
Yeah.
think about it, it's almost creepy to that child that grew up without knowing that parent. So, understandably, these children who now became adults at that point, they will refuse to even acknowledge the fact that the worldview that they had growing up, the the so-called truth that they were told when they were younger was all a lie. It's hard to acknowledge the fact that they grew up in a total lie and their life was a total his their life is totally fake from the fundamental level. That's too much for the child. So understandably, these children will just avoid that situation. I think I wouldn't want to. I mean, I guess it depends on the child or the person. Maybe once they grow up at a certain age, maybe they will want to know a little bit about their past. Maybe they will like to dig into the past a little bit. But in most cases, they will have their own, challenges of life, their own, jobs, school, busy life. You don't want to dig into the painful memories. You don't want to learn that your entire childhood was all a lie.
You're absolutely right. And I've talked to a number of young adults who were abducted as children and realized it later on. I mean, let's think back when we were 18, 19, 20. Those were not easy years. You graduated from high school, you have to decide your career path, what you're going to study at university. You've become an adult, you have independence, but also responsibility. That's a very emotional and hard time during our lives. So these young adults have told me, hey, it's just too painful. It's too painful to go in and dig deep and really think about the fact that one of their parents took them from another parent. And you're right. They tell me, this is anecdotal, that, they really would rather just kind of keep going on with their life and studying and going out with their friends because they don't want to go into that deep pain. And then there's another issue is there's a fear of then the emotions and often the anger they have towards the parent that did that to them. So they have one parent they don't know, and they question whether, and again, this is anecdotal evidence that I'm getting from young adults who've been through this, is what they're telling Find My Parent, that the parent that was left behind, they have no idea if what mom, dad said about that parent is true. Does that parent love me? Does that parent want me? So it's like this huge risk if I'm going to go try and meet this parent and reunite and build a relationship. I have no idea if it will even be a good relationship because of everything I've been told. And at the same time, if I do that, I'm putting my relationship with the abducting parent, the parent I've known my entire childhood, I'm putting that at risk because that parent, regardless whether you're 18, 19, 20, 30, 40, probably not going to be too happy when the child is going and building the relationship with the left behind parent. So there's a lot of emotions that they just don't want to deal with, and I don't blame them. And then there's this fear of, being rejected, and a lot of them that I talk to also they're so angry with the abducting parent but they often still rely on them financially, maybe college tuition. Some countries, it's not uncommon to live with your parent until you get married. And so they're like, I can't do anything to piss them off, even if I'm 19, 20, and if I go build a relationship with my left behind parent, that abducting parent is not going to be happy. So, yeah, these are not just issues that go away with the click of a button because the child has turned 18. They're real, they last forever. And my opinion, the best way to fix them is resolving abduction cases very early on, within 6 months as supposed to be done by the Hague, so that that's when children are going to have the least amount of trauma that, really stays with them for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be most ideal. When that is not met, then the left behind parent is also stuck in this situation where the damage is going on in real time, and there's no way you can stop it. Damage is to your life, your future, and the child's future, and those damages that can never be undone. Like, how can you? There's no way you can turn back the time and rectify it. There is no way. And to some people, it's their life, and that's what child abduction does. It just ruins somebody's entire life. And it might be a cliche, but like our life is a precious thing. And why leave somebody to suffer through their life with this identity crisis and the doubt about their self value or their origin as a child of a parent? So I think the significance is a lot more than what people would easily tend to think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I have one left behind parent that often tells me, life is so difficult as it is. Like, we have all these pressures with work and, school and studying and just surviving every day is difficult. Why make life more difficult with parental abduction and these issues? So Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, but your case went to the Hague, and there were clear, the case was ruled in your favor that Bryan should be returned to the U.S., that the U.S. was his home. That's where he was living and had a life at the time of abduction, in addition to mom signing an agreement saying that. And orders were then given, I assume, to the Korean authorities that, okay, Bryan needs to go back to the US. And it's on then the Korean authorities to enforce that order. And enforcement is where the gap is happening, where the bottleneck is happening. Is that right?
Um, that is correct to some extent. I would say that tells 80% of the story. The reason why I mentioned earlier that the problem lies on many different levels in Korea is because there are a lot of players in this whole picture that were not doing the right thing. Just to give you some examples, the abductor's attorney was what we call a Hague Network judge. He was a former Hague Network judge. So he was kind of like the representative of Korea to make Korea as a country compliant with the Hague Convention and follow the objectives and the missions that Hague Convention is founded upon. But he argued that Bryan, like I said earlier, his case cannot be any clearer than that it was a true abduction. And he started arguing that this was not an abduction and Bryan doesn't need to be returned. And the not only the logic was flawed there, and it was very unethical to argue such things. He made a lot of morally wrong um, decisions, such as some intentionally misinterpreting the US court document. He also tactically submitted certain evidences the night before the hearing. And in a funny way, Korean legal system allows that to happen. So that's just to confuse the judge, because the judge doesn't have enough time to review it. They also refuse to get served whenever there is a court decision, so that it will have to follow a certain time period. And once that period is lapsed, then it can be recognized as um, basically a service by expiration of the that grace period. So they try to delay the process as much as possible, and they would not submit any response to the court for as long as they could, and then later argued that they need more time because they just got assigned this case. So this was a Hague Network judge that was representing Korea. Then there is the school, Bryan's school teachers and the principal who was obstructing the enforcement. They were um, they were manipulating the situation, and they tried to influence Bryan in a very unethical way by making it by insinuating that this whole process was a difficult thing for Bryan, so that Bryan can either deny or object the enforcement, or he would simply express that he is tired so that the whole process could be terminated.
How old is Bryan?
He is now 9 years old. This happened when he was 7 years old.
So they see it as a 7-year-old has the right to, I mean, I can understand the tired kind of delay tactic, but can a 7-year-old in Korea say, no, I don't want to go, and they will stop the enforcement of the court order at that point?
So this happened. So we did the enforcement attempt 6 times. And although there were some limited amount of changes in the Korean enforcement rule because of all these pressures that were coming from the US government, finally they changed the law a little bit. But from the very beginning, the main challenge was the enforcement officer, when they go for the enforcement, they don't go there with the mindset of enforcing. They already know that child enforcement never happens in Korea. That's just like the norm. And their mindset is, okay, we're going to return saying that this enforcement failed. We'll just write a report why it failed. The easiest way is we'll ask the child, and if the child says no, then we can simply write a report that the child refused and we couldn't force him to go.
And does anybody
And
know a 7-year-old that's going to willingly kind of go jump in a car with two government
exactly,
employees that are strangers to him or her? No.
exactly, yeah. So the enforcement officers are corrupt. Um, Recently, we found out that they are regularly meeting up with the abductor and their family. So every time we try to enforce the case, whether we go to the school, the child gets pulled out of school, and all of a sudden, magically, that very day, he just misses school for 4 days, and then he goes into homeschooling for a month. Magically, what a coincidence.
Wow.
And
This is
then when
South
we
Korea. This is South Korea, which is, supposed to be this super developed, democratic, country. And this is happening in South Korea.
Well, this kind of things make me wonder all these images that I had about Korea, even
Mm.
growing up there, spending many years living there in Korea. The image that I had about Korea, I start self doubting myself. is this the true, the reality of Korea? Was I just living in the false image that I built in my mind? So the attorney was corrupt. The enforcement officer was corrupt. The judge was corrupt because there were two occasions the judges made a complete lie in they wrote a lie in their judgment. The first one was when I criminally reported this case. The judge said it's believable that the mother argues that the dad doesn't have a financial capability to take care of Bryan and he cannot provide medical insurance because he did not submit a counter argument.
Mm.
But we did.
Mm.
We submitted a counter argument that was like 30 pages. And my attorney even gave a phone call to the court saying, "Hey, we submitted the argument." But that's what he wrote there. Um, I don't know what it was, some undue influence, monetary bribery. I don't know what it is, but that's what the judge said.
Mm.
The other incident was when I was trying what we call an indirect enforcement. So that's putting monetary pressure on the abductor, saying each day that you don't return the child from today on, you're going to pay the left behind parent this certain amount.
That's like
The
a
first court,
the ruling, like an official ruling in Korea that would basically oblige them to pay that amount.
yes.
Okay.
So that was kind of like a hypothetical theory
Yeah.
based on Korean structure. If you don't return, let's say, a car that you borrowed, then you can make them pay that. Excuse me. And the first court order we won, and
Mm.
then she filed an appeal, went to the second court, and the judge lies here again. It's a different judge. He says the left behind parent, and I'm directly quoting this judgment, didn't try the new enforcement rule, and he is idly asking for money.
But
That's
you
what he
tried
said
it
in the,
6 times.
yeah, and I tried it 6 times with the new enforcement rule.
Mm.
After the most recent change of the enforcement rule, I tried two more times, but that's what the judge said. So he denied that case, and now that was kind of like my only hope that I
Mm.
had, but
Mm.
it was denied.
Can you
So the
tell us
judge is
about this
corrupt.
enforcement rule for people that maybe they've never experienced parental abduction? So there's an order from some authority, maybe The Hague or some government authority saying this child was abducted, needs to be returned home to their native country. And then what is this enforcement rule supposed to do if it works correctly?
Yeah. So enforcement rule is still very vague. It's supposed to enforce the court order, regardless of the situation. So, for example, the main problem that occurred in the past is that the enforcement rule said if the child objects the enforcement, you cannot enforce. Or yes, that's what the previous enforcement rule said. It never said ask the child and make the decision. So it never said that. But the way it developed in the Korean society is that the enforcement officers, because they didn't want to enforce these cases, they asked the child so that the child would say no.
Hmm.
So that became a problem because that means no child return cases can be enforced.
Hmm.
So the Korean Supreme Court made some amendments to the court rule saying they completely deleted that sentence there. And they brought what they called child experts, so that the enforcement officer will not feel pressure to make the decisions because they can rely on the child expert. But the reality is, the child expert still is under the enforcement officer's control. They don't have any authority. So what happens is enforcement officers threaten the child expert, saying, "You follow what I say. If you try to do something that I didn't authorize or I didn't approve, I'm gonna criminally report you." That's what the enforcement officer said. And then what it becomes is they still do the same thing. They make the abductor hold on to the child. They don't do anything even when because in my case, the family member showed up in the enforcement side and he picked up Bryan and ran away and hid Bryan somewhere and then showed up and started an argument with the enforcement officer. But the enforcement officer didn't do anything.
Mm,
He was the guy that was threatening us that he would report us for a criminal activity. And when
mm,
they left behind, I mean, the abductor side family member did something like that, he didn't take any action. Um, and then the child expert has no authority while the mother is holding Bryan,
mm,
bawling and, you know, howling and weeping. It was all, uh, many people there couldn't believe what they were seeing because it was just a complete, um, show of, it was just a fake display of her crying. It was just a way of keeping people away from the enforcement because she was physically holding Bryan and she was crying. So people would be intimidated because nobody wants to be accused of pulling the mother and the child apart while the mother is crying like that. And because she's crying, Bryan was pretending to cry too because Bryan doesn't know what's going on. But
scared.
he feels like he has to be sad. He
Yeah,
just
yeah,
he just reads the room, and if mom's sad like this, and she says if I am taken away, she doesn't want that to happen. I should, play along, and I should cry too. So he was pretending to cry. So nobody did anything, and they still declared a failure of enforcement, stating that this is unenforceable, and that's how it ended. So the enforcement, there is there is very little understanding of how law enforcement needs to happen because in any enforcement, let's say let's say it's not a parental abduction and a stranger kidnapped a child. You have to get in there, separate the kidnapper and the child immediately so that the child is protected, and then you have to remove the child from the scene. But it still gets stuck in the situation where everyone's um, kind of forced into a situation where you still have to ask the child, "Hey,
yeah,
Bryan, why don't we?" Because that's what ended up happening. The child expert had to ask, "Hey, Bryan, if you go to America, you will see dad. You can come back to Korea." But no child's gonna say, "Okay, let me go to America.
yeah.
I want a big change in my life." Nobody's gonna say
On
that.
a 7, 8-year-old, 9-year-old child. What's mind-boggling to me, and just like you were saying, any other type of enforcement, let's say it was a household that wasn't deemed appropriate for children, they need to remove the children from the household, or some type of criminal, maybe a parent did, stole something. Police would come in and they probably wouldn't care. They would probably do their best to calm the children and make it as calm as an environment as possible, but they would leave with the person who broke the law. That's why they go in. And so it seems here that these Korean enforcement officers are going in now with a child expert. the parents and their families know very well the kind of drama and reaction they can have to make the enforcement officers feel uncomfortable and willing to say, like, I'm not going to cross the line here. I'm just going to, go write my report that says wasn't able to enforce this and actually take Bryan, right? There's no US involvement. It's not possible for like an official from the US embassy or something, because I also see it as like these enforcement law officers are Korean. The mother's Korean, the child's Korean. Do they really believe that Bryan should be sent back to America? Because I think also that could be a play. I mean, potentially this is a Korean child. We want this child and to be raised in Korea. If we're talking about another country where maybe there's religious differences, I could see authorities being like, I don't actually want that child to go back. So is there any room for American officials or whatever to be involved in these enforcement visits or whatever you want to call them?
So the U.S. Embassy was involved in the enforcement process. Strictly speaking, they couldn't be directly involved. They couldn't take an active role in the enforcement because we are relying on Korean law. So Korean officials have to take the lead. They have to do the most important action. But they were there to observe and see what's going on because this is a U.S. citizen
Mhm.
held illegally with somebody who the court said is dangerous. And even the Korean court said the child has to be returned to the US where he belongs. So it is very justifiable that the US Embassy keeps an eye on this. So they were there witnessing everything. And I'll directly quote one of the US Embassy staff's description of this situation. This person said, this this was surreal. The experience was surreal. This personnel couldn't even believe what this government official was seeing. It's hard to believe. Like, is this a country that claims to have a legal structure, a reliable legal structure, or is this a third world country? It seems
Mm.
more like a third world country situation. So the enforcement officer doesn't want to enforce. He even said to my attorney and my team that he will arrange um, a mediation so that you can peacefully figure it out with the abductor. The level of ignorance and the lack of understanding just leaves me completely astonished. If this was a case where we can just talk it out and find a good solution, the abduction would have never happened. We already had an agreement.
Yeah.
I tried to persuade her to return Bryan. The court orders were made. I have 13 court orders, and she still doesn't return Bryan. She was detained in jail twice, once for 15 days, another time for 30 days. But Bryan is still not returned.
In
And you
Korea, she was
expect
in
me
jail.
to talk to her in Korea.
Wow.
During that time, so, so that's the other corrupt component here. It's the family and the
Yeah.
most important player of this whole picture. We know parental abduction usually as okay, the mother takes the child, the father takes the child. But without family support, usually this kind of things would not be possible. Usually there is a big family support behind them. So in my case, the the mother abducted the child, but she abducted Bryan with her younger brother. Her parents sued me for from some civil lawsuit, and then they got a judgment in Korea when I wasn't able to defend myself because I was going through a divorce and there was a financial sanction put on me. While you're going through a divorce, that can happen. So while the mother grounded me in the US, the parents sued me in Korea. I wasn't able to defend myself. They got a judgment. They made the mother um, come up with an agreement with me so that she can take certain amount of money that she agreed to be responsible. She took over a certain amount of obligation that I need to pay the parents under this judgment that they got. Then she flees to Korea, and then the family starts arguing. Well, that's whatever you land an agreement with her. That's between you and the mother. We're going to sue you for whatever we got judgment for. And then secretly from behind, they offer um, assistance for her, um, for her situation. So this is a whole family scheme.
Yeah.
When she was detained, she was in jail. The brother obstructed the enforcement. He even told us that he cannot disclose where Bryan was. Um, he would argue that we will have to ask Bryan whether he wants to go or not. And even when I was in Korea, he was holding Bryan physically from behind and prevented me from picking him up.
Mm.
Um, I mean, it's just unbelievable. So there's family members involved here.
Yeah.
The other part is the Korean government trying to make a deceitful move. They started arguing, well, the mother already said she's going to return the child, so let's try a mediation. And then they secretly brought in my attorney and then said they even coerced them to make concessions. He said, um, I know you might have some complaints, but try to be as cooperative as possible. And then they forced us to have this kind of amicable solution discussion and then reported back to the US government that was complaining to the Korean government that some constructive conversations are happening at the moment. So a lot of people involved in this whole situation are all corrupt. I should add that there are good players. I received a tremendous amount of support and help from many great people in Korea, whether it's a legal representative or some nonprofit organization, child experts, all different kinds of people really helped me a lot. And with good heart, they didn't, it's not because I did something for them. It's not because they expected anything from me. They just did it out of good heart and out of good intention. So there are good people, but a lot of people, majority of people, and goes from my family members, enforcement officer, judges, the Korean government officials, and all these people involved, even the police. Because police, it's a long story, but police try to deceive me too. And long story short, it was when my mother filed a criminal report on behalf of me. They tricked my mother to sign a withdrawal letter and then asked her to go through a civil route because my mother didn't know anything. She signed the paper, and then when she asked me, I told her to go back and cancel the withdrawal. They said, "Oh, well, you already signed it, so we're going to just close this case." And they didn't accept that case anymore.
Mm.
So nobody wants to handle this case. Um, so the level of corruption on different sectors of the Korean society, whether it's the government, the court, family members, civilians, including the school, law enforcement officers. It just made me lose hope about the Korean society. Eventually, maybe in many generations, Korean society might get it right. But it's hard to expect that anytime in my lifetime, it's hard to expect that I will see any meaningful change. So that's why I've been really relying on the US government trying the extradition of the mother. FBI is working on it. I don't know how far they got, but I know that they're working on it. So that's my only hope that Korean government will not obstruct at least one competent government trying to do its job. If
Mm.
they can't do their job, they should at least let the US government do their job and they should not obstruct their enforcement of law.
Yeah. So you have really no hope that anything will change in the near future in South Korea that will.
Not in the foreseeable future. I know Korea is planning to change their law,
Mm.
but it will take many generations for people who are actually practicing law to understand the significance and why they should be doing this, how they should be applying law. There will be a lot of hiccups and trials and errors.
Yeah. I mean, arguably, it's not necessarily a law, and I've heard this in other countries. It's the application, it's the implementation of the law that's failing. Is the law exists? There is an enforcement. This child should be returned. It's black, it's crystal clear. It's the enforcement of that, the implementation of the law, and I've heard this in plenty of other countries as well. I know that there, in the last maybe year and a half, there have been two successful reunifications of, I believe, all American citizens, I believe, were all internationally abducted to Korea. And after years of fighting and going through all kinds of legal processes, these two fathers were able to get their children back from Korea. Does that like give you any hope in the system there that maybe there's something that could change? Or is it really just you really see the US government has to take a leading role in this?
Yeah, US government definitely needs to take a leading role. There's an untold story about one case that has been returned. I don't want to mention his name because I didn't get his consent yet. I'm sure he will be fine, but just to be respectful. But after the child was returned, this, I'll just be blunt, the idiotic Korean lawmaker by the name of Lee Sung-kwon. And not to be political, I'm not affiliated to any political party in Korea. I'm neither conservative or liberal. I'm just criticizing what is happening based on the factual matters. This lawmaker started arguing that the child was returned forcefully without notice. That's the definition of enforcement.
Mm.
But he's arguing that this is a child abuse, and the Korean government succumbed to the pressure from the US government. And the way he sees this issue is just completely distorted and it's out of touch with reality. And I have no words for it because if you are a lawmaker, you should understand that the Korean lawmakers decided to sign the Hague Convention and implement their own domestic law to abide by it. And Korea cannot even enforce these cases in a timely manner. And it took many years for this child to be returned. And now you're arguing, or at least complaining, that the child was returned based on the Korean court order. it just makes the whole country look really bad.
Yeah.
Um, at one point, he brought together three um, abducting parents. One of them was my child abductor, and the other two were involved in other publicly known cases. And he started arguing that he was making some baseless arguments that some cases the father was abusive, some father was alcoholic, and we know this is just a complete it's a joke because we all know this particular person lived in Korea for many years without any sniffing of alcohol at all,
Mhm. Yeah.
doing protests, being on the news, talking to Korean government officials.
Yeah.
As far as I know, I have never seen him throughout these many years that he was drinking. But this lawmaker was arguing that this person was an alcoholic, and the fact that these children return is um, is against the children's rights, and um, it was inhumane. It was what he was arguing. Um,
And by the way, these kind of claims really, they can really impact people's lives, right? Their careers, their friends, their family. These are not claims that people should just be throwing out, allegations they should just be throwing out. They, these people that are being accused of domestic violence and alcoholism and whatever, drug abuse or whatever, it has real implications for their everyday life.
that is right. In this particular case, it was so outwardly and it was so unbelievable that it didn't really affect him, I believe, personally. But it is true that just throwing out some unverified allegations like that can really damage people. Um, yeah, but he had a press conference with these abductors being in front of the camera, weeping and playing victims, saying that these children are about to be sent and be ripped apart from the mother, and they were asking for help.
Hmm.
And the whole country is going backwards at this point. Yeah, your role as a lawmaker is to improve Korea. You should really look at what you signed as a country and start thinking what you can improve to make Korea a more responsible country that abides by the international rules.
Yeah.
But this guy was saying Hague Convention is being abused and the children's human rights are being abused as well. It's a national embarrassment. It needs to be revealed. His name is Lee Sung-kwon. He's from Busan. He was his district is Busan in Korea.
Yeah, that is unbelievable. Well, Jay, thank you for sharing your story. I learned a lot today about, the Korean system, things I didn't know. I hope that we'll have you back on soon with a happy story that this, extradition will work and things will change for you. Again, we've had two very positive reunification stories out of South Korea in the last year and a half, 2 years. So I'm hopeful that also your case will turn in the right direction for you, but for Bryan mostly that, deserves to have a father in his life. So thank you
Yeah, I
for,
really appreciate it. And I didn't intend it to be too, depressing or negative. There were certain things that really needed criticism, so that's what I tended to focus on. But there are a lot of positivities. because we are making changes. Even though it's slow, and we already talked about it, it's way slower than what we would hope. But the level of awareness is very different from 6 years ago when my child abduction first happened. So that's definitely a positive sign. And you don't really get to see uh, something that you are directly involved in is slowly changing the world and slowly uh, making some I would say I wouldn't say changes yet, but it is making some difference. It is it will be a good um, soil for the next generation to really bring about meaningful changes. But without the sacrifices that we are going through, there will be no bright future. So, although it's painful, although there are things that need to be improved, if this can save some other kids from going through the similar kind of um, traumatic experience, I would say it wasn't for nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. It's a slow process, and let's hope future generations things have changed drastically for them, and those that are now abducted, their cases are resolved as fast as possible. Change takes time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I really want to say I really appreciate your all your efforts, all your energy that you put into this the mission and the purpose that you have in your heart. And it's we really owe you a lot as a society, this whole world.